Hello everybody, my name is Fortifier and welcome to the Season 1 finale of the Ready Go Gaming Show episode 16. Today, we're going to call back a bunch of people who have taken the time and blood and sweat and energy to record their voice lines for this series to come back and talk about their top 5 games. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's made this possible. Back whenever we started this, we didn't think it would become anything, but what it's become is a safe haven and source for tons of educational material, all the way from Capcom all the way to Data East. It's been an incredible ride, and we're prepping for Season 2, and I'm really excited about it, and just thank you guys. So I'm not going to keep you here. I'm not going to be able to mention everybody who has performed in the past or who will be performing on this episode. It's going to be a really simple episode. There's a recap, we're going to do a top 5, and then we're going to give you a teaser for the next season of Ready Go Gaming Show to show you exactly what we've got lined up. So without any further ado, sit back, relax, enjoy the finale of Season 1 of the Ready Go Gaming Show. It all started with episode 1, which was about Capcom. I don't know why I gravitated to Capcom so easily. Even my first Fireside Chat was about 1942 on the NES. I guess it was just a company that I knew and loved for so long. I remember wanting to talk about companies and other genres, and at the time, franchises didn't really cross my mind. I didn't have much experience editing, and you can kind of see that throughout the episode. I approached a former streamer named Shotobro and asked him to help out with audio, and shockingly, he approved. This kind of set the framework for guest speakers. Speaking of framework, this is the only episode to use what I refer to as Format A. That format consisted of a brief history and then covering 4 major genres and those games that were famous from those genres, for example, shoot 'em ups, vertical horizontal, beat 'em ups, and others. If you ask me, the audio was pretty whack. I was using a collar microphone, and you can hear the distinct difference from me using a Yeti, which is something I would use later. This episode has the highest amount of views to date, and sometimes I'm afraid people watch the first episode and then get bored because of how rigid it was. Luckily, people who enjoyed it still watch the others, so this is a fine reminder of where it all began. Shotobro, my guest speaker for the episode, would stop streaming about 6 months after the release of this episode. Sometimes he pops up, and whenever he does, it's a treat. Episode 2 was ambitious because we wanted to talk about genres. Right off the bat, I did some administrative changes. In the intro, I dropped the year that flashes at the bottom of the second screen, and you may have seen it in the first episode, but it definitely was not there for any of the other episodes that we did. I also messed around with the fonts for the intro, something I still mess around with to this day because I can't figure out a good one that really pops and stands out. I also didn't pronounce Ready Go Gaming Show at the end of the intro like I did for the previous episode. I did this because I was thinking about how the name of the show would be pronounced technologically. I had this idea of the Ready Go sequence from Diddy Kong Racing mixed with a heavily processed gaming show sound. I still haven't gotten around to doing this, and it's been more than 2 years now. Anyway, guest speakers for this RPG episode were Bag of Tricks and Blurgarian, who you might now know as Cilia. She's come back a few times to lend her voice, and it's always nice to have her. The episode utilized Format B, which involved genre explanation, History A, History B, and franchises. We use this format to distinguish the difference between Japanese history and American history for certain genres. This episode was also the first time Babyfire had made an appearance on anything I was doing, streams, YouTube videos, the works. I really dropped the ball with the music on this one. More often than not, you'll see that the audio levels were really bad. It was all part of the learning process. Bag of Tricks still streams often, playing whatever he wants, whenever he wants. However, Cilia took a reprieve for a while, but occasionally streams, but most of the time just hangs out with her friends. It was this episode that Cilia began her time with the team as a very strong foundational member. Oh fuck, this episode. So this is the episode that almost killed the project. I fucking sucked at looking up the history of id Software. I put incorrect pictures up, the facts were wrong. Essentially what happened is that when I released the episode, Barley, a partnered Twitch streamer that I had just met, really enjoyed it and pitched it to John Romero. Yes, that John Romero. Here's the issue. John fucking hated it. He went on to Twitter to say that it was video game history told wrong. Well, I picked myself up by the bootstraps and reached out for a bunch of people to come out and help with the episodes to make sure that we were doing it right. This led to You Got Marin, Breath of the Wild, Tesseract E, and of course Barley to join the team to make amazing episodes that we could fact check and make sure that we were representing the topic correctly. In fact, for about 4 months, I was trying to get an interview with John Romero and his wife Brenda, but it never came to fruition. Their advice and attention led to much better episodes, in my opinion. The guest speakers for this episode were Fatal Framerate and Max from Game Squad Squad. Fatal still streams, but under the name of Chain Gun Wolf, and Max still kicks ass doing retro achievements from the comfort of his beer can covered desk. Two fantastic streamers that were an absolute treat to work with. Episode 4 was about Nintendo, and it was one of the more highly sought after RGGS entries. Literally everybody who volunteered for the episodes wanted to gravitate towards the Nintendo entry, but they already had plans for months to have You Got Marin and Breath of the Wild to come by as a team to record the episode, right? So we're gonna have team members come by and record the Nintendo one, and it all fit in perfectly because we all love Nintendo. You Got Marin, her name's based on Link's Awakening, Breath of the Wild is based off of Breath of the Wild, so I was like, hell yeah, let's get these guys. This was also the first episode to feature the Flaming F logo stinger, which I had reserved for other stuff, such as the Fireside Chat and the brand new Contemporary Corner that I was working on. This episode was also the longest to date at 1 hour and 10 minutes, a record that would not last long at all. In talking about Nintendo, I was dreadfully afraid that Nintendo would DMCA or copyright strike the episode given the footage that we were using. I asked the members to not promote this episode on Twitter or YouTube for a very long time. It wasn't available on YouTube for a while too. However, Lyle convinced me to do it and it remained there for a while. This episode perplexed me because it opened the idea of talking about franchises, as Mario and Zelda both independently had so many games that they were perfect for an episode. This format would be known as Format C and would be used a little bit later. Marin and Lyle still stream and remain consistent friends to this day. The second genre-based episode was the fighting genre, and boy, this was a turbulent episode to make. Originally, we were supposed to have not enough credits, myself, and Guttural Steve talking about the fighting genre, but that fell through due to other engagements. NEC was too busy, and Steve was going through some stuff personally. I reached out to Gunstar Heroes to step up, but he was really busy as well. So ultimately, I had to reach out to anyone who would help, and Sick Jake, who was a retro streamer, stepped up to fill the gap along with Sarconius. We glued the episode together with what we had, and we had a blast with it. Unfortunately, I was using a really shitty version of Premiere, so I had about 73 hours of editing that I had to replicate 4 different times. I lost about 120 hours worth of work because Premiere was crashing due to resource issues. I used to also put the logo of the game we were talking about in the corner, but I decided that was way too much, and as such, shied away from it. Guttural Steve still streams fighting games, which is why I wanted him to do it, but his recent ambitions have been with Andy Milanakis as a guest on his An Adopt affiliate show. Pretty cool. Sarconius also still streams amazing titles, and Sick Jake continues to be a veteran speaker on the Ready Go Gaming show, streaming whenever he can. Episode 6 brought us back to the normal formula for talking about companies. This time we had Drex and Indie Kebab. Gunstar was supposed to be on this episode, but again, life was just chunking curveballs at him. So Indie, who also helped me with my audio settings for my microphone, expressed interest in not only joining the episode, but also in joining the team to be our resident audio engineer, which I gladly accepted. Anytime you hear someone talking from episode 6 onward, you can thank Indie, now known as Farty, for helping make that possible. Sega was a fun company to talk about. There were tons of games and it sparked an interest to make another franchise episode, this time talking about Sonic. That was the last little push that I needed to get those episodes made, but we made another really difficult roadblock to handle, and that was Activision and Blizzard, but we'll get to that one in a second. Sega was a powerful episode. To this date, it has been the longest episode ever created at 1 hour and 40 minutes. It's also one of my favorite episodes. Drex still streams under the name Drex23, and Farty either streams under Farty or Super Dei, doing GTA role-playing streams. To me, this episode is a good starting point for watching the series, and it was also the longest episode when it came out. Episode 7 was an anomaly, and to me was one of the most boring episodes that I ever made. We had very little information about Acclaim, and all we knew was that they published games versus making them. To facilitate that, we needed to create another format. This one was known as Format D. This format featured history, subsidiaries, and then the franchises that were associated with all of the subsidiaries. So essentially what it turned into was you, the viewer, getting power fucked with knowledge, and we had to attempt to string in some jokes here or there to keep the audience entertained, and to me it didn't work. Acclaim was the first of 2 episodes that premiered on the 1UP Heroes channel, courtesy of Tesseract D, and that didn't last very long. This was due to the breaking up of 1UP Heroes, but everyone that was associated with it, Captain Mintbeard, Link the Informer, Josh of the Barony, Tesseract D, are all still fantastic friends to me and to each other, even though they all do their own things now. Tess is a major component of my sanity and would lead to me getting involved with Antstream to bring back the popular Arcade Anomalies skit that had ended around episode 5. Barley lended his voice for this one, but he was here for the next episode truly. Barley occasionally streams, has a phenomenal YouTube, so check him out if you get the chance. Tesseract E hates how I script because I type like an idiot, but he also streams religiously and is a great, entertaining person who loves to cover all sorts of games from the 70s all the way up to now, just like me. I had fun with episode 8 because it was a genre video about survival horror. I even parodied the intro to Resident Evil, something that was fun but labor intensive. At the point, I started heavily getting into Premiere Effects and After Effects for special effects to make sure that we could have some fun with it. It's also the time I started caring about YouTube thumbnails. Fun fact. The survival horror episode was one of those that greatly encouraged people to go out and try to find new games, and that's why I focused so heavily on finding as many of the popular or even unpopular franchises out there so people would be made aware of it. Ironically, my favorite portions of the episodes are when we talk about franchises because more often than not, I haven't even heard of most of these games, and giving people the opportunity to see it before they play it is really fun. I just love it. Barley and Celia returned to talk about it, but Celia was uncomfortable with her voice and at that point left the team upon the conclusion of the episode to rediscover her voice, a move that all of us here at Ready Go Gaming Show supported and to this day still wish her the best. The next 2 episodes were the roadblocks that affected us in the beginning. Activision. Now, if you know anything about Activision, you know that they merged with Blizzard, but with how in-depth we go, we knew that we needed to break up the episodes into 2 distinctively different ones. If we didn't do this, it would have easily turned into a 3 to 4 hour long episode, and nobody wants to sit through that. So we made the decision to talk about Activision in episode 8 and Blizzard in episode 9. Activision was a lot like Acclaim though in how they published as well as developed, so we needed to cover that, and in that same breath, we accidentally followed the same path of the Acclaim episode. It was long, clunky, and didn't really translate well to the viewers. It was still a great episode, and it marked the first appearance of now associate producer Ace Gaming LPs. Sick Jake returned, and Celia did one more time due to the necessity of getting another speaker. Ace streams retro stuff sometimes, but he's got a job now, so he doesn't stream as much, but you should still check him out. He is my best friend, and having him on the team is a blessing. Episode 10 was an anomaly too. Originally, we were just going to talk about Blizzard, but we didn't realize that there was much more to Blizzard than met the eye. Davidson, the makers of educational games such as Math Blaster, and Sierra, who worked on old DOS games such as King's Quest, Space Quest, and Police Quest, both needed to be talked about too because they all aligned with what Blizzard was in terms of a family. So we kind of tried to tie all of that in together. And here's the kicker. I got to talk to Al Lowe on the phone, the maker of Leisure Suit Larry, and that was fucking awesome. Al worked on one of my favorite games, Torrens Passage, and talking to him was humbling to say the least. This episode also featured 3 brand new freshman speakers, Purse, the DOS Nerd, and Lord Knight Calebcom. Out of these 3 fine folks, Purse is the only streamer that still actively streams. He's been a longtime friend and supporter of what I do every day, and I'm eternally grateful for that. Caleb I wanted to talk to because he had a fantastic voice, was a close friend, and knew a lot about MechWarrior, which made him perfect for the Activision and Blizzard episodes respectively. I knew in the Activision episode, he was a special guest to talk about MechWarrior, so I pitched the idea of him coming to make his own episode. The DOS Nerd was a mandatory speaker because he is the subject matter expert on pretty much everything DOS and point and click in general. Together we put together a much better episode than Activision and started keeping the same energy for the next few episodes. Episodes 11 and 12 would be our attempt at the franchise-themed episodes we considered back during episodes 4 and 6. It was also a time where I wanted subject matter experts to talk about franchises that they loved. I found that when people spoke about topics that they were in love with, they had more energy, and that energy was so authentic that I ate it up. I invited Hamps to talk about Donkey Kong, Purse to talk about Mario, and Lyle, who took a late spot when I got sick and lost my voice, to talk about Zelda. It was at this point that I realized I really don't need to be the person talking. Other people can accomplish what I do. It took a heavy workload off my shoulders, and I really like that. Hamsh is a very close friend and even pitched the ideas of commercials to break the monotony, and that worked beautifully. People loved it. In the opening of this episode, I also inadvertently said that it was the longest episode, but it wasn't that long. It was an hour and a half. One of the things I considered while producing this episode was putting the music of the game to the footage using remix songs from YouTube. I didn't do it in the Mario episode, but I did do it for the Zelda episode. This is also my favorite episode, true story. All of the guest speakers from this episode stream religiously and are very close to my heart. Episode 12 was the Zelda episode. This episode was easily the most requested, most anticipated episode we've ever done, and there were plenty of new things that we tried, namely the music selection concept that I pitched earlier. I did not pay attention to the script though. Marin says during the franchise section that we were talking about the consoles, the handhelds, and then the spin-offs, but instead I did the order of release followed by spin-offs. It's one of those things that you recognize when you go back and watch your work and find subtle things that you wish you could have done better or a different way. Anyway, the episode 4 Dream Team was back with Lyle and Marin and a new face, Lazarus DS. Together and with their experience, they took the time to make this episode as magical as they could. This is another fine example of one of my favorite episodes. The energy in it was simply fantastic, and we got to talk about our favorite franchises. Additionally, Lazarus DS, who I met by being on Mr. Scoot's stream team, asked if he could help with script editing. Since I occasionally left in typos and made it somewhat difficult to read, I said yes. In addition, he wanted to speak, so I said double yes. Despite his rampant smacking, we trained him into a fine guest speaker and a team member that continues to do fantastic things daily. Episode 13 was the one that burnt me out. We had a lot of drop-ins and a lot of dropouts occurring, and it was frustrating. I hate SNK, so I knew I didn't want to talk about it, so I needed someone who had the passion to help me make it possible. Ace was that person. Additionally, I was moving, so I needed someone to help produce, and again, Ace did that. Episode 13 was solely produced by Ace Gaming LPs, and in my opinion turned into a fine episode that even featured a special appearance from Mr. Scoot himself. SNK was a common company, so having a more relaxed topic was refreshing given all that was going on in our individual lives. I had just gotten back from a training, COVID was running rampart, and we had tons of time on our hands. It was also the freshman episode for Game Master Herb from Three Bears Gaming, a group of fantastic human people who go out of their way to entertain the masses while spreading awareness for LGBTQIA+, as well as putting their foots down for human rights. I loved working with Herb, and honestly, I sure hope to have an entire episode with only the bears in the future. Episode 14 was about Sonic. It was the third franchise episode, so I had to decide exactly what elements I wanted to retain. I knew the commercials were great, but the Sonic episode really didn't warrant it. The way that the games were, we just kind of opted out of doing it, and I kind of wish I would have added in at least a trivia section or something. We definitely used the musical element again because some of the remixes were really cool. Additionally, we were able to work with Bag of Tricks again, who was someone I hadn't worked with since episode 2, so hearing that deep resonating voice again was the tits. I made another editing mistake by mentioning that we would talk about the compilations, but again I opted out of it last minute and didn't edit that out. Sorry about that. Sonic was a cool episode because I didn't understand the sheer amount of games and the overall cultural impact of Sonic in Japan. If you go to Japan today, you will see him everywhere, and I couldn't even imagine the sheer magnitude of those games when they were kicking ass in the 90s. Episode 15 was the most recent episode, and again, was a quiet one. I had Wonder Maven, Ace, and myself come together for one more solid episode before this finale, and again, we asked Mr. Scoot to hop in and talk a little bit about Windjammers. I mean, he didn't hop in, he kind of crashed in through the door. It was a much more vanilla episode than what I have worked on in the past, but that's because it took us almost 2 months to get it together. This episode almost didn't happen. COVID, my separation, life in general just wasn't happening. I'm glad I got it figured out though, and here we are, the finale of the Ready Go Gaming show, and now you are all caught up.
As an outlier in fashion and taste when it comes to video games, the top 5 games of all time that I've chosen are memorable, unique, and beautiful in many different ways. Aspects that might not exactly woo the mainstream crowd, but will certainly pull in an individual and consume them. My name is Ace Gaming LPS, and I was in quite a few of the later Ready Go Gaming show episodes, as well as the assistant producer for a few of them. The games I want to talk to you about today are Nights into Dreams, Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen, Double Dragon 2, Jet Set Radio, and Phantasy Star Online Blue Burst. They may not sound like much at first glance, but each of these 5 games contains remarkable gameplay, a beautiful OST composition, and in every case, a compelling story that you can sink your teeth into for hours without a moment of doldrums. To begin in chronological order, Double Dragon 2 The Revenge was released in 1998 by Technos as a direct sequel to Double Dragon. You may have already heard of Technos if you're a long-standing fan of the Ready Go Gaming show, as they've done many brilliant projects. So, what made Double Dragon 2 so good? To name a few things, the story of where your girlfriend is brutally murdered that sends you off on a clan wipeout revenge mission, the tight gameplay, the super cool fighting moves that feel oh so delicious to pull off, and the boppin' OST that would stick with players for years, to name a few things. But what really made this one special was that it was originally developed as an upgrade kit for the original Double Dragon, but then evolved into its own game with an enhanced memory size. Many ports were made, but if you want the original experience, pop the NES card in, pal. Next up is Nights into Dreams. Now, never before have I experienced such a beautiful game that was made via conducted research on REM sleep and influenced by psychoanalysts such as Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. This game was brilliantly bright, vividly vibrant, and had even an OST that a choir of angels couldn't compare to. Now, Fumi Hataya, Tomoko Sasaki, and Fumi Kumatani of Sega knew exactly what they were doing when they composed for this unique flying side-scroller. The plot of the game is done in a beautiful show-don't-tell style where Claire Sinclair and Elliot Edwards are both failing in life and losing their life dreams. At the same time, the powerful Lord of Nightmares, Wiseman, is trying to take over Nightopia and the real world as well. When they fall asleep that night, they have nightmares, but are rescued by knights, who then takes them on a journey to save both worlds and their own dreams. Work was done on this game by Sonic Team and Naoto Oshima, who designed Sonic the Hedgehog and Dr. Eggman originally. That's pretty cool. This game was also heavily featured in Sonic games such as Sonic Adventure, Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Pinball, Sonic Advance, and so on. It's also taken up a prominent role in the Archie comics and Sonic the Hedgehog, and also had its own comic series for a while too. Fun and hard to put down, this game is now available on Steam. I wholeheartedly recommend you grab this remastered classic. It's got a great price on it right now, so get it before it's gone. If you think we're done with Sega, well, you're in for a surprise with the next item on the docket. Jet Set Radio, but in America released as Jet Grind Radio, but we're professionals here, so we're going to use the correct name. Jet Set Radio was released at the turn of the millennia, and was a sweet action game that featured the GGs, short for Graffiti Gang, or Rudies, who roam the streets spraying graffiti and skating hard while listening to a pirate broadcast radio hosted by our very own DJ Professor K. The name of the game is that the cops, and later on some very bad people, don't like you bringing your art into the town. So you gotta skate, grind on rails, and do some totally gnarly tricks to spray your way to the top in this fast-paced game. The OST was done by a multitude of really cool artists, most notably Hideki Naganuma, who's also done work for the sequel Jet Set Radio Future, Ollie King, and Sonic Rush on the DS. The concept of Jet Set Radio and its soundtrack was so popular that a revival website of the music and its core values was launched and still boasts itself strongly today, known as Jet Set Radio Live, a real radio station on the net looked after a very real DJ Professor K. In fact, I'm a member of that site myself. Jet Set Radio! Going out of order for just a moment, Dragon's Dogma was an instant classic for me, with its gritty medieval style and story that plucked just a simple commoner from the beach to be the latest in an unending cycle of torment, chaos, and violence. Dragon's Dogma has a very vibrant and poignant soundtrack that generally encases the message of the game, which becomes clearer as you progress through its incredibly open-ended story, which allows a player to play at their own pace. It is, however, an incredibly difficult game, and even with the unique customization system for your party members, which are called pawns, you'll oft find yourself struggling against powerful foes. While a beautiful game that can fulfill your wanderlust for hours, it's not for the weak of heart. And that brings us to the last game on the list, and the most amazing. A 4-episode enchanting collection of love, war, peace, and the horrible wrongdoings by the government. Phantasy Star Online blew my mind and eyes wide open to the world of how a space migration story inspired by Diablo could be so gripping. Phantasy Star Online follows the stories of the inhabitants of Coral, who have absolutely depleted all of their planet's resources and must make a last-ditch exodus to a new planet to survive. So they create Pioneer 1 and 2, the first ship to be deconstructed into a dome, and the second to be a civilian-class cruiser that will transport refugees of up to 30,000 in population. However, due to the very dumb efforts of a corrupt, batshit insane scientists and very evil government politicians and officials, when Pioneer 2 arrives and makes contact with the central dome, a giant explosion rocks the surface, and no reply is heard. As a government-sanctioned mercenary, your job is to figure out what happened, and boy, did a lot happen. This game was developed at the turn of the millennia as well, and it was a highly addictive, highly acclaimed, first-of-its-kind MMO on the Dreamcast. Hell, Sega chairman Isao Okawa even paid out of his own pockets for the Japanese Dreamcast's internet access for this. Just imagine how much that would have cost back then. That's a lot. It was a beautiful action role-playing game, except for Episode 3, which was a turn-based card game, with tons of loot, loads of story, and an OST that continues to blow minds even today. It was so well received that even today, private servers are still very much active on the PC and are getting custom quests and customized things built for them. And a less successful but very still popular sequel, PSO2, or Phantasy Star Online 2, is still operational to this day. Well, we had to wait 10 years for Japan to give us Phantasy Star Online 2, but I still prefer the first one. Sega kinda screwed the pooch on that deal, but we still have the first one to play anytime we want, so that's awesome. These are all games that have beyond amazing music, great gameplay, and incredible story. Games that are deserving of their 10 out of 10 A+ grade. Sometimes they fall a bit into obscurity, but most people will probably go, "Oh yeah, that game," when you mention them. If you're inclined to play them, you'll most likely never forget the impression they'll leave on you either.
Why, hello there. I was told I could be quirky here introducing myself, but I misread that as perky, and now I may have confused this with my OnlyFans introduction. Anyways, I'm one of the RGGS team, and I was also a guest speaker in episodes 3 and 4 about Nintendo and Zelda respectively. I'm a level 29 military gamer, streamer, aspiring internet personality where people respect my opinions on all sorts of things and don't respect them on a lot of other things. I've been gaming since I was 3, I'm a Nintendo fanboy, and I have borderline unhealthy obsession with The Legend of Zelda. Now, speaking of impressionable opinions, let's roll into my top 5 games of all time. Just to clarify, they aren't in any particular order, nor am I comparing them to each other. These are just ones that hit the hardest for me, both in quality and in more quality. First up is Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. This game speaks volumes for itself. It was the first 3D Zelda of the franchise, bringing wonder and exploration to a dimension we'd truly yet seen done. Linear Zelda storytelling always hooks me in. This was the first time that we had NPCs in a Zelda game that I actually cared about. It's also the one where I came up with my very first Zelda fan theory, as well as some ideas for hypothetical spin-off games that could take place at the same exact time of the game. 7-year-old me's mind was blown then, and 22 years later, I have thousands of hours in this game from just playing it casually to running it into the ground with randomizers. Next up on the list is Bomberman 64. This is one of those games that, for me, truly withstands the test of time. This is the Bomberman game I think of when someone mentions the series. I don't really think of the multiplayer aspect to the game at all. What gripped me here was the bomb-ass music and how simple the gameplay complemented it, and vice versa. The story was very simple: save the bomber folk from an alien invasion. The lack of jumping makes for falling onto piles of bombs to bounce around super fun for exploration. I'm stupidly nostalgic for this game, also I speedrun it. Dark Souls 3 is, in my opinion, the most finely tuned and smoothest of all the Soulsborne games. It took From Software 3 iterations to perfect the formula for this particular franchise. It brilliantly builds upon the world that the first game laid down, as well as corrects the mechanical and gameplay fallacies that the first 2 games had. The bosses are some of the most creatively designed in the franchise, save for 1 or 2 gimmicks. Looking at you, Vape Lord Wolnir. This was my entry into the franchise, which could be argued as a mistake, but the only regret would be for learning the story. Dark Souls 3 capitalizes the lore of the franchise, which, in my opinion, makes going back to the first game able to be viewed as a prequel. A combination of the smoothest gameplay and some of the most beautiful environments makes this the best of the Soulsborne games and easily the most fun to play. I was not expecting to be as blown away by Undertale as I was. For a game that was made by a single individual, let me repeat, a single individual, I was not expecting to cry. The art style gave me some MS-DOS feels, the music is iconic, and the characters in the game are some of the most memorable I've ever seen. The game has some serious mental health, self-care overtones, and undertones. The dynamic between the NPCs and all of their interactions had me all over the emotional spectrum. Papyrus and Sans had me laughing, the motherly and fatherly figures in the game had me crying, Undyne had me feeling empowered, Flowey had me feeling enraged, everything was felt giggity. The gameplay complemented the quirkiness of the overall design, and I loved every fucking second of my journey, whether it was going through the first time for my pacifist run or killing everybody my second time around. The emotions were felt on the full spectrum. Last up on the chopping block is Borderlands 2. Writing is a big factor when it comes to whether or not I'll get roped into a game. The Borderlands franchise has always had me going with its comedic and sarcastic tones all throughout the games. Borderlands 2 in particular would be top dog. The thousands of hours I've thrown into this game is insane. The art style for Gearbox games is simple, cartoony, but mature in every regard. This installment also has some of the best DLC in any game I've ever played. Pretty much an entire D&D campaign being played by some of the major NPCs, and you are the character going through the entire story, while learning that the DM is going through grief of the deaths of one of the game's real-life leaders. It's beautiful, emotional, and quite a roller coaster. From Claptrap, a robot who's programmed to love everybody, yet is the most annoying character to every single NPC in the game, to Handsome Jack, a narcissistic billionaire asshole who buys a pony, names it Butt Stallion, hates pretzels, and is a sarcastic asshole all the time. This game takes the cake for some of the best writing I've ever seen in any video game ever.
Hi there, it's me Drex. You may remember me from such RGGS episodes as the one about Sega. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I want to take a few minutes to talk to you about my favorite games ever. So sit back and relax as I take you on a piece of my gaming journey. Number 1, Counter-Strike. I bet this pick for my number 1 game of all time really has you confused. Unlike my number 2 game, which only occupied a short period of my life, Counter-Strike occupied tens of thousands of hours and had a really profound impact on my life. While there have been many sequels released over the years, nothing in my opinion holds a candle to the original. Originally released as a total conversion mod for Half-Life in 1999, it was later acquired by Valve and developed in-house with the help of some of the original devs. By the time it was acquired by Valve, it already had a very loyal fan base. The game pits two teams, terrorists and counter-terrorists, against one another. Both teams start each map with a limited amount of money to purchase guns and equipment to aid them in their objective. Getting kills and completing the map objectives will earn you and your team more money. This unique asymmetric approach made the game ideal for competition. I was introduced to Counter-Strike by finding a montage video of competitive gameplay called Frag or Die on LimeWire. After watching this, I immediately found out how to install the game, started playing, and tried to find a team to compete with. To say that Counter-Strike paved the way for esports as we know it today is an understatement. Back before Twitch was around and YouTube was around, Valve incorporated something within their game engine called HLTV, which allowed you to use the client to connect and watch live games being played as a spectator. Big matches were commentated on shoutcast radio stations. Simply connect to the HLTV and open up Winamp, and you had both video and audio feed for matches in progress. Community-driven leagues such as the Cyber Athlete Amateur League allow players from across the globe to compete with others within their region and advance through different tiers each season. Pro teams competed at the highest level, called Invite, while newer teams formed and filled out the Open division. Each season, teams would be promoted from Open to other levels, and teams could possibly be demoted from Invite to make available a spot for a rising team. I could probably teach a college level course on the history of competitive Counter-Strike, but what I'm trying to get at here is that if you enjoy esports at any level, as a competitor or a fan, you owe thanks to the granddaddy of them all, Counter-Strike. Number 2, BioShock. Before I start, let me preface everything I'm going to say about this game with the following. I've only played BioShock one time. I bought it on release day, put it into my Xbox, played through it in its entirety in one sitting, took it out of the Xbox, placed it on the shelf, and it remains there to this day. That being said, I have had thoughts about replaying this game. The original experience, though, was so special to me that I have never been able to bring myself to do it. Released in 2007 and remastered in 2017, BioShock, at least for me, lived up to all the critical praise and hype it received. Set in an alternate reality 1960s underwater city called Rapture that the protagonist Jack winds up in after a plane crash, BioShock can best be described as a first-person survival horror game with RPG elements. As you uncover the secrets of Rapture and its creator Andrew Ryan, you will power up your character with Adam, a genetic material you find in various vending machines throughout Rapture. Along the way, you'll be asked to make some decisions that will really make you question your own moral compass, and these decisions will affect which ending you get in the game. BioShock is a very atmospheric experience, and while I can't speak to the replayability of the game, I can assure you that a single playthrough of this game is worth it. If you haven't played it yet, would you kindly pick up a copy and do so right away? Number 3, Mischief Makers. Shake Shake! If you have ever played this game, Marina saying "Shake Shake" is burned into your mind for life. One look at Mischief Makers and you should know, this game was developed by Treasure. Their first Nintendo console release, Mischief Makers is a unique puzzle platformer with a great soundtrack and an extremely different aesthetic. Released in 1997 for the N64, to mixed reviews, because critics are idiots and don't know what the hell they're talking about, this game ditches the standard combat system you find in platformers and shakes it up a bit. You control Marina in a puzzle-filled adventure through the planet Clancer on a journey to rescue her beloved professor. Nearly every object in the game can be grabbed, shaken, and thrown. I could go on and on about how much I love this game, but I feel it's a game you have to experience for yourself to truly appreciate. Since it is criminally underrated, this game has yet to see a spike in price and can usually be picked up for less than $20. If you own a Nintendo 64, do yourself a favor and add this gem to your collection. Number 4, Gunstar Heroes. Gunstar Heroes is a quirky 16-bit masterpiece. Released in 1993, this run and gun started development in 1991 by Konami staff members. Following Konami's refusal to embrace the staff members' ideas, the team quit and formed Treasure in 1992. This game is by far my favorite 16-bit title and is a mandatory play for anyone who considers themselves a fan of classic video games. The character design is unique and the graphics are bright and in your face, a perfect pairing for the Sega Genesis. The gameplay is typical of a 16-bit era run and gun, run to the right and blow shit up, but there is a twist that we will learn is a signature Treasure twist. Lots of boss fights. As you progress through the game, be sure to check out all the weapon combinations that are at your disposal. There's something to match everyone's playstyle. If you have anything other than a great time with this game and its wacky antics, then I'm not sure that you like video games, or fun for that matter. Number 5, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo. Released in 1996 for the CPS2 arcade system and later across multiple home consoles, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo was Capcom's response to Sega's massively popular Puyo Puyo 2. While you may think the name implies that it is a sequel, it is not. The game is a lighthearted parody game with characters from the Capcom fighting universe appearing in chibi-style graphics. The gameplay is simple yet addictive. Match and stack gems of the same color to create larger gem clusters. Clear the gems by touching a matching color crushed gem to your stack. You create combos by placing non-matching crushed gems on top of your stack. There's also a diamond that will appear every 25 turns, which will clear all of whatever color you touch it to. As you clear your stack, you will send garbage pieces to your opponent, which will hinder their progress. The larger the gems you clear and the combos you create are, the more garbage that will be sent their way. Each character in the game has a unique garbage pattern that they send to their opponents. If you are a fan of Street Fighter, Darkstalkers, fighting games in general, or puzzle games in general, this classic is an absolute must play. I hope you enjoyed my top 5. Hopefully I was able to introduce you to something new you'd never heard of, or teach you a little something about one of your own favorites. Till next time, take it easy and stay safe out there.
Growing up, I did not play a lot of RPGs. In fact, the only RPG I really got into was Kingdom Hearts, and I didn't even know that it was an RPG. I approached it like a hack and slash such as Devil May Cry or any of the other games that play in that particular style. When I moved to Korea for the Air Force, I played Final Fantasy. I downloaded it onto my iPhone, and I played it all the way through, and I was pretty much hooked on RPGs at that point. I didn't even know there was a different thing called JRPGs. So since then, I've played tons of Final Fantasy games, more specifically 1 through 7. However, I've only ever streamed 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7. I've never streamed 2 and 3. It's because I personally don't like those games. Maybe the next time I hop to Famicom, I'll try it out and show you what it's all about. But for those of you who do know me, know that I'm really poo-poo when it comes to RPGs, and most of the time I win by brute forcing my way through them. I don't take the time to learn the mechanics or any of the gimmicks or spend 800 hours on one game. I'd rather just, beat it. I don't like grinding, and that means by proxy that JRPGs are not really my thing, but that all changed with Chrono Trigger and more importantly, Final Fantasy VI. Final Fantasy VI was the golden standard of what RPGs could be on the Super Nintendo. The music, the experience, the opera scene, the fights, the plot development, and the customization of characters. Honestly, this game was 100% a perfect experience. And for the first time in my life, was a JRPG that I didn't mind spending tons of time on. I almost didn't want it to end. If you haven't played this game, I strongly suggest that you do. In the 90s, I owned a computer. However, most of my time was spent on the Nintendo 64. But that doesn't mean that I ignore all of my roots when it comes to retro gaming. One of my first DOS games I ever played was Torrens Passage. The other one would be Mad Dog McCree, right? Common games, not really that great. Well, Torrens Passage is one of my favorite ones, but it's not on this list for a very specific reason, and that's because there's games that are simply better than it. A prime example of this was about a year ago when I hopped in my DOS playthroughs through GOG and started playing a bunch of old 90s DOS games. I played King's Quest, Police Quest, Phantasmagoria, Torrens Passage, you name it, I played a bunch of them, but the one that standed out to me was Loom. People told me that I needed to play this game, and they didn't just tell me, they sold me on it. Not many games can catch my attention the way that Loom did. The whole game is based around music, and the title song alone made me stop dead in my tracks, and for one time in my career on Twitch, I did not want to start the game because I wanted to keep hearing that song over and over and over again. For those of you who don't know, the Loom soundtrack is from Swan Lake by Tchaikovsky, the same guy who did the Nutcracker Suite as well as that Canon song, right? Everybody knows the Canon song. The game itself is rather short, and that sucked, but from the get-go, this game was first made apparent to me in Secret of Monkey Island, which was an astonishing game that legitimately captivated me the entirety of its experience. For those of you who don't know, Loom is heavily advertised in The Secret of Monkey Island, courtesy of this guy who wears the pirate hat. He's like, "Oh, you played Loom yet? Well, if you haven't, you better fucking try it." Anyway, this is a must-play DOS game, and to me is far better than any of the other Lucasfilm titles such as Indiana Jones and even Monkey Island. Trust me, just try it. There's just something about the playability of this game. Compared to my other favorite titles such as Torrens Passage and Beneath the Steel Sky, this game is just a masterpiece. I really wish that was just a little bit longer. I never thought I would be saying that an RPG would impact me, nor that I would go my entire life without playing a game that was so popular. Chrono Trigger was that. I played it when I was a kid, but that was a ROM. I spent tons of time playing it, and honestly, I just wasn't interested. Same with Shadowrun. It wasn't until people started demanding it that I played on stream that I realized this was the real deal. It was an RPG that didn't necessarily hold your hand, and for the Super Nintendo, it was the tits. It was tough deciding this because Final Fantasy VI was also equally good, if not better, but with Chrono Trigger, the entire experience was a non-stop roller coaster of emotion, progress, and independent choices that drove a very pleasant gaming experience. I think even if I did play Chrono Cross, that it would in no way, shape, or form be any better than Chrono Trigger. It's a cultural icon of gaming with memorable music and a plot that can be played and ended multiple different ways. This is the greatest game of all time for me on the Super Nintendo, and a close second and third would be Final Fantasy VI and ActRaiser. ActRaiser does have its own frustrations, but Chrono Trigger as a standalone title could easily be considered one of the greatest games ever created. I was notorious for moving around and trying different genres as well as different games. Given the years I was alive in the 90s, I really didn't experience the PS1. When I went to Walmart, I saw Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, but my mom would not let me get it at the time. They had this weird rule where I could only play teen games if they were Star Wars, and other than that, I had to play E for everybody, right? That's just how it worked. However, whenever I got older, that perspective over time changed, obviously. I bought 3 with my allowance and entered the world of Snake Eater. This game was magnificent. The music, the environment, and a slight sense of urgency to accomplish a goal while feeling consistently watched was refreshing. It was so impactful to me and so fun that I would also buy the Essentials collection from EB Games, where I would play Metal Gear Solid, number 2, and number 3. Knowing where the franchise would end up would make it easier for me to tolerate the older games, and to this day, Metal Gear Solid 3 turned me on to the Metal Gear storyline and ushered me into a series of games that stands the test of time. When I think of my favorite game of all time, I have to consider more than just them being fun games, right? Does that make sense? I look into the music, the atmosphere, and the story, which for me are the three elements that matter more than anything. In that regard, my first choice is Ocarina of Time. When I was growing up, I didn't have that many video game systems to call my own. My dad sold the only NES we had and did the same for the Genesis as well as the Super Nintendo. He didn't want me to get addicted to gaming, but we all know how that turned out. Anyway, one Christmas around 1999, my dad bought me the Nintendo 64. He also got me a few games, Banjo-Kazooie, Super Mario 64, Mario Kart, Mario Party, and more importantly, Ocarina of Time. I was new to any Zelda, or any franchise for that matter, and I recall playing Ocarina of Time on a demo kiosk in the mall. That's right, that used to be a thing. In Walmart and in malls across America, you could go and try these games on demo kiosks. Demo kiosks have kind of died out, but back in the 90s, they were the fucking tits. The atmosphere, the story, the music, to me, Ocarina of Time is a true, perfect game, a masterpiece that established a generation of gamers and set a baseline standard for what a true game could be. Ocarina of Time spoiled me. My favorite song being the Spirit Temple theme is one that I go to when I light incense and just want to relax. When you compare it to the other 3D games at the time, namely Tomb Raider or even Resident Evil, you can still see a jaggedness of the environment. In most Nintendo-led projects, you do not see this. Ocarina is a warm, enveloping, and crisp example of what Nintendo was capable of, and still to this day is capable of doing.
First of all, Worms Armageddon was the epitome of gaming for me. I still hold this game dear to me. It was the 90s and my grandfather brought home my first Windows PC. Dinky second-hand PC, 60 megabytes of RAM, 1 megabyte graphics card. Piece of crap. Not even powerful, but it was everything to me. I had a demo disc that had this game from a PC Mag. The demo was what got me hooked into gaming for real. The animations, the voice acting, the gameplay, I still believe that they haven't made a better Worms game, even now. Two-dimensional landscapes, little overly animated worms, and all the weirdest weapons you can even think in a turn-based combat. Throw an old woman that blows up, blast them into pieces with holy hand grenades that scream hallelujah, or unleash a concrete donkey that literally destroys everything. I love that game even today. Next game on my list is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. That was the first extreme sports game I played when I first got my PS1. Skating in crazy environments while listening to Ace of Spades. What more can you ask for? I got hooked instantly. I still believe that the first game is the best, but this one has the most nostalgia feels for me. It is also the first game that I noticed I was actually good at. I didn't even know what speedrunning was when I speedran this game for fun. Without timers or anything else, no tools. It was simply fun. In times that I still miss dearly. Now, the third game on my list, Tekken 3. Oh boy, here we go. My trusty PS1 without a memory card had to stay running because I wanted to keep all of the hidden characters that I unlocked. And boy, was there a lot of them. I still believe that Tekken games have one of the very best fighting mechanics in the entire genre. It is the most fluid experience among all of the fighters that I experienced so far. I played a lot of them too, since fighters are kind of my forte. Ask Fortify. Now, the fourth one, another fighting game, is King of Fighters 98. The bane of my school allowance. The arcade screens, arcade sticks, arcade smell. Ugh, the smell. I had to survive the smell somehow because I can proudly say that I finished this game in the arcade with all of the characters. Just don't ask how much I spent it. I simply had to. I didn't even know what they were saying back then, since I didn't know English or Japanese, but I knew that they all had their own backstories and way of life. SNK was really good at making characters with good backstories. Keeps you hooked. Also, I still believe that it has the best super moves and one of the worst bosses in the entire fighting genre, Orochi. Ugh. Not counting the general. We do not talk about the general. And the last game on my list is Rocket League. I know, after all these games on the list, it's not retro. But hey, it is fun. And right now it's free to play too. I loved playing it when it first got released, and I still love playing it. I don't really enjoy racing games, I don't enjoy soccer at all, but somehow those two combined made me want to play this game so bad. I'm kinda good at it too, after years of continuous play. I still hate the toxicity that the new age online gameplay causes, but hey, what the heck, even beautiful roses have thorns. And those would be my all-time top 5 games. Every single one of these are a blast to play, even today. And I recommend you to play every single one of them. Just check them out.
Hi, my name is Lazarus TS, and I was part of episodes 12 and 13 of the Ready Go Gaming Show, and I also joined the staff as script editor from episode 12 onward. I'm going to put a big spoiler warning here for Mega Man X, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy Tactics, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and Suikoden, so if you haven't played those games, just skip my section. First up, we have a two-way tie between Mega Man X and Chrono Trigger. First, Mega Man X. So, I grew up playing games on the NES, and one of my favorite game franchises was the Mega Man series. Once I got my SNES in 1992, I want to say, what was next gen at the time blew me the hell away, and Mega Man X was no exception. But even looking back at it now, it's one of the most perfect pieces of video game software in existence, and I dare any of you to try and argue it isn't. I literally went to an anime con once where there was a "I'll roast your favorite game" panel. I raised my hand and said Mega Man X, and the dude couldn't do it. Why? It takes everything the original series was about and evolves upon it. You no longer just have boss weapons and maybe some optional equipment, you also get 4 pieces of armor to upgrade your character, life bar extensions, sub-tanks, you can ride in robots, and you even get a Hadouken power-up that kills most bosses in one hit. Most bosses react in different ways when you hit them with their weakness, and it even has more believable and interesting characters in X, Zero, Vile, and Sigma. The graphics and music are exceptionally done. The story is interesting and actually shows X growing as a character, losing to Vile in the beginning of the game and absolutely obliterating him at the beginning of Sigma's Fortress. If you didn't grab the X-Buster upgrade, Zero gives you his when he dies. I could talk about this game for hours, but I'll stop there. Next, we have Chrono Trigger. The SNES was RPG Central for me. There were a few RPGs on the NES, but most of them were action RPGs like Phazanadu and Zelda 2. I grew up with Dragon Warrior, but I wasn't a huge fan of it, and I didn't grow up with the original Final Fantasy. I did, however, rent Final Fantasy 4 and 6 at a young age, and that drew me into the genre. But Chrono Trigger was a whole nother thing. It took the director of Final Fantasy, Hironobu Sakaguchi, the director of Dragon Quest, Yuji Horii, and Akira Toriyama, the creator of Dragon Ball and graphics designer for Dragon Quest, and put them all on a team filled with other stars from Squaresoft. Chrono Trigger did things that other games just didn't do often or didn't do well, and they did them magnificently. Time travel, parties with more than 4 or 5 characters, memorable side characters. It even did things that most RPGs wouldn't even dare, doing stuff like ditching random encounters in favor for seeing enemies on the map, and the combo system that allowed 2 or 3 characters to combine their special moves or magic into more powerful techniques. They also did 3 huge things that were revolutionary at the time. First being that they set you up to think Magus is the end boss of the game, and you have a very final encounter-looking battle with him about 15 hours into the game. And then, oh, you win, but the game keeps going, and the story keeps getting more and more dramatic. The second thing they did was they have Chrono, the main character, die. This was something no other game did at the time, and if you didn't dig around enough, Chrono could stay dead while you completed the rest of the game. Third, they let you recruit a character that was once a big bad, Magus. Or, you could kill him to avenge Frog's best friend and have Frog revert to his human form for your ending, but don't do that because Magus is the best. The game also has an amazing soundtrack, graphics that pushes the edge for the SNES, of course making sure to get plenty of use of Mode 7, multiple endings, and what I believe is the first use of the New Game Plus system, known in Japan as Tsuyokute New Gemu, or Strong New Game. Okay, now that we've got the two-way tie out of the way, we're on number 3, Final Fantasy Tactics. Take my love for RPGs and put a twist on it. This was my first exposure to the Final Fantasy job system, since Final Fantasy 3 and 5 hadn't been released in English at the time. It was also my first tactical RPG. The story takes place over an entire country, where you witness the political power struggles between several major groups and even take part in it yourself. You gain friends, lose them, and reunite with them. There's a billion different side quests and hidden items and things for players to find. There's all kinds of unique characters like Agrias and Mustadio and even Orlando, who arguably breaks the game. The battle system is incredibly unique, involving different variables like zodiac compatibility, levels of courage and faith and such that all get involved in calculating how much damage you do. But it's also simple enough that you can ignore all that shit and just play the game however you want and you'll get through it just fine. There are 20 jobs that all generic characters can use, plus a few additional ones for characters like Agrias, Beowulf, and even Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy VII. You don't get access to all of them at once, but rather you have to become proficient in base level jobs to gain access to the ones that would make use of those skills. For example, you have to be a decent squire in order to be a knight or an archer. You have to be a decent archer, thief, and geomancer to become a ninja. These jobs give the player hundreds of different choices for what skills to use for each character, and the only thing you're locked into with a class is the base skill tree and equipment the class can use. Anything else is up to you. Want to have a knight that uses white magic? You can do that. Want to be a samurai that dual wields 2 katana while having access to powerful summon magic? You can do that. The possibilities are endless. Of course, the most broken one's mathematician, but that's another story. Okay, number 4, Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Now, I'll admit that I only had 2 of the classic Castlevania games growing up, Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, and Super Castlevania 4. And at the time, I couldn't beat either of them. But I randomly rented this from a local video store, and I was blown away. The music was better than most of the PSX games at the time, the graphics were gorgeous, it was fully voiced, even though some of those lines I look back on now and see as incredibly cheesy, and the 33-year-old translator in me now slaps his forehead over, but that's besides the point. The game starts with you playing as Richter Belmont, so you think you know what you're getting into. But once you climb the stairs, you suddenly get into a fight with Dracula, and even though I'd never beaten a Castlevania game before, I knew he had to be at the end of the game. You beat him, and then a cutscene starts, and suddenly you've got a new character to play as, Alucard. He moves really smoothly, and you can kill everything in one hit. But then you meet Death, and he takes all your awesome gear away, and suddenly you're back to level 1 with barely doing any damage. I didn't get really super far into the game at this time, but I could tell that it was something that I really wanted to sink my teeth into. Eventually, I was given this as a Christmas gift and given a chance to actually beat the game. I had a game magazine, I think it was EGM, that had a tips and tricks section to figure out how to get past certain parts. But at first I ignored it, and I did what most people do. I killed Richter, got the bad ending. So I started tearing through that magazine, and found out that I hadn't even remotely explored the main castle, had to get more relics, the Spikebreaker armor, get these crazy rings that open up a secret passage in the clock tower, and then meet up with Maria to give me some fucking glasses to allow me to proceed. Wait, Richter was under someone's control this whole time? Get the fuck out of town, that just didn't happen back then. Then you go slightly past that, and your mind gets fucking blown. Oh, cool, the entire castle's upside down. You've only finished half the game. So now, I complete another half of the castle, get 5 relics, get my Alucard gear back in the process, then I go kick Shaft's ass and beat down old Daddy Dracula. But there's more. The magazine said I could put in a few passwords as my file name to access new things, like Luck Mode, Richter Mode, and Axe Armor Mode. This game was fucking packed to the brim with content for the time. Okay, last but not least, number 5, Suikoden. Now I know most people tend to prefer Suikoden 2 over this one, but hear me out. This game was revolutionary for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, 108 recruitable characters. It was the first RPG that was released in English to even have a cast that big, let alone 108 characters that could be in your personal army. Now, not all of them are fighters, so some of them can't join you in battle. But you get a headquarters for your army, all of those characters will be there, and they all have distinct personalities. Eventually, this headquarters also becomes your own personal town. You get an item/armor shop, a magic shop, an appraiser, a gambling room, a sauna, a library, painting room, sound select character, window setting character, and all of which have their own set of little items to collect for customization galore. Next, there were 3 battle modes. You have party battles with a 6-person party with 3 in the front, 3 in the back, and different characters that specialize in being either front, back, or both. In the party battles, you also have special unite moves with characters that have special relationships. For example, putting together the main character and his long-lost martial arts teacher, or putting all the blacksmiths or all the elves in the game in your party. Next up, you have army battles. using your army and all the characters you've recruited to do large-scale fights against the Imperial Army. Then you have one-on-one duels against characters that get up close and personal and feature some pretty neat animations and dialogue. Now, the story is also pretty amazing. I'll put another spoiler warning here, but I did warn you in the beginning, okay? So, your main character is a young boy growing up in an evil empire where his dad just happens to be the strongest general of said empire. You start off working in the army only to find out that, well, they're evil fucks. They kill your best friend, and you find yourself entrusted with the Soul Eater Rune, one of the 27 True Runes, a reoccurring theme in the Suikoden series. The True Runes essentially have power over certain elements in the world of Suikoden, and the Soul Eater has the powers over life and death, and also bestows immortality upon its wearer. You slowly start to see how corrupted the Empire truly is, and meet a woman named Odessa, head of the Revolutionary Army. She's killed saving a child during an attack on their HQ by the Empire, and she entrusts control of the army to you. You take over an abandoned castle after beating an undead dragon that happened to be sleeping there, and use that as your base to build up your army even further. Throughout the story, main characters can and will die. Gremio, the caretaker of the main character, dies in a selfless act to save the main character and his friends from flesh-eating bacteria. Characters like Pawn can die in scripted duels if you've neglected leveling them up throughout the game. And other random characters you've recruited can die during the army battles if you make mistakes and lose too many members of your own army. Any of these events will stop you from getting the true ending of the game, as you'll be missing any of the 108 characters. You need to play this game. In fact, I'd argue you need to play all the games I just listed, but since this is likely the least known out of my list, I'd say if you're going to play any of my top 5, make it the first Suikoden.
Hey guys, Lord Knight Caleb Com here. You may recognize my voice from the Activision and Blizzard episodes of the Ready Go Gaming Show. My favorite 5 games, the games that had the biggest impact on me as a gamer and as a person. These are the games that I look back on, and I've got some great memories attached to them. Number 5, Baldur's Gate. My introduction to Dungeons & Dragons, which I still play to this day. Baldur's Gate was high fantasy with characters so memorable, I still quote them 20 years later. Go for the eyes, boo! Go for the eyes! I've poured hundreds of hours into playing this game over and over again. Play the good guy, play the bad guy, play the guy somewhere in between. Baldur's Gate was the entrance to a world of fantasy adventure for many like me. Number 4, Final Fantasy VI. There's not much that I can say about this game that hasn't already been said. It's a masterpiece in every sense of the word. The music, the characters, the art, the everything. There's one thing that I must say about Final Fantasy VI, however. One opinion I will never let go of. General Leo deserved better than he got. Press F to pay respects to a fallen VG hero, folks. Number 3, Tenchu Stealth Assassins. Came into my life right about the time I found a love for anime. One of my first anime, Ninja Scroll, widely regarded as one of the most influential of all time. Ninja Scroll and Tenchu complemented each other in my mind. I could become an elite ninja warrior, stealthily carving my way through the enemies of my lord and master, striking fear into their hearts and bringing hope and peace to the land through bloody assassination. Tenchu was my gateway to all things feudal Japan. Number 2, Mech Warrior 2. The start of my love for all things giant and stompy. Mech Warrior 2 was revolutionary. Giant robots bristling with guns that stomp across battlefields, laying waste to everything around them. No game series has ever gotten the feeling of being an enormous machine of death and destruction across, as well as the Mech Warrior games. Even the most recent Mech Warrior 5, although flawed, still brings me back to the childlike glee of crushing my enemies beneath my fusion reactor-powered feet. And finally, number 1, Fallout 2, the game that let me do anything. Fallout 2 is the greatest game ever made, in my opinion, when it comes to your choices impacting the game world. Even your base statistics can affect what areas of the game are open to you. If you play a moron, half the game is cut off because you're too damn dumb to understand the quests. NPCs turn you away, and in one case, a critical NPC will say, "You're too stupid to do this. I'm just gonna do it for you, chosen one." And you lose out on like 5 hours of content. Speaking of choices, if you come across a porno studio and want to suck dick for a few bucks, you can do that. Want to be a boxing champion? You can do that. Be the savior of the wastes or sell your wife into slavery, go back, seduce your gay brother and sell him into slavery too. You can be anyone you want, and the game changes with your choices.
Hey folks, Sick Jake here. I was proud to be part of episodes 5 and 9 of the Ready Go Gaming Show, and I'm glad to come back for the end of season 1 to give my personal top 5. I have to say, taking 30 years of gaming and drilling it down to a top 5 is incredibly difficult. But hey, let's try. As a kid from the 80s, I like to subject my family to all of those cheesy, terrible movies that I used to watch in that decade. From Running Man to Masters of the Universe, but there's one flick that stuck with me as a kid. That's right, video game cash grab The Wizard with Fred Savage. Now I don't care that it's bad, I don't. It just encompasses all my feelings of wonder from my years as a Nintendo kid. It's also the movie that unveiled Super Mario Bros. 3 to me, and that is my number 5. Just the sheer number of power-ups, and strange ones too, from the frog suit to a flying raccoon. The insane amount of levels and environments, with airships and tanks, even a rage-inducing desert, where the sun literally kills. Mario Bros. 3 is one of the greatest sequels in any franchise. Nintendo pushed the NES hardware to the absolute limits with the graphics and scope of this classic. My number 4 is a title that defined PC gaming for me. I used to work night shifts, listening to late-night talk radio, from aliens probing to the invisible hand of the Illuminati choking on freedom. I don't believe half of it, but it's damned entertaining, and it's all in Deus Ex for Mindstorm. Playing as JC Denton, a nano-augmented government agent, you go down a rabbit hole of intrigue and government conspiracies. I eat this stuff up. Hacking terminals for lore, rewiring security drones, stealthily running through air vents to avoid detection. Hell, you can even rampage to the front door with a crowbar in hand, swinging it at a militia in the ruins of a future Statue of Liberty. Deus Ex is a game I play every few years, and despite the early Unreal Engine graphics, it still holds up incredibly well. A first-person shooter combined with an RPG. Who'd have thought? One of the greatest things in retro gaming for me is ROM hacking. Now, there are just too many to list that I love, but there is one that has redefined a game and made it its own genre. Number 3 for me is Link to the Past. There is lots to love about this Zelda title on the Super Nintendo. From its simple story to its varied and detailed sprites, to just the joy of exploring not one, but 2 worlds full of dungeons and adventure. It's a timeless classic, and I dust it off every so often. But then in 2016, the Link to the Past randomizer was released. This extension of ROM hacking takes all the items, enemies, and carefully designed progression and flips it on its head. Now every game of Link to the Past has new surprises, whether it's King Zor trolling me with a single arrow, to unlocking the Butter Sword before even reaching the Dark World. I'll never forget that one run, where I had to beat most of it swordless with only a hammer, just because the randomizer loves it when it hurts. It's given Zelda an almost daily crossword puzzle sort of take, and I can't get enough. Number 2 on my list is BioShock Infinite. I've never played the original, it's one of my great gaming sins, but I did play this fantastic entry in the series from 2013. Let's set aside the gameplay. It's just standard for the genre. But that music, though. Barbershop renditions of 80s hits? Oh yes, please. The characters and just the atmosphere as you walk around those floating islands of Columbia. It's indescribable. As you unravel the utopia, seeing that sinister dystopia underneath it, it's a trip that few games can take you on. But the real reason it's in my top 5, though, this game released the same year as my second daughter was born. And I'm being careful not to spoil, but there is one particular flashback scene where a baby is ripped away from your arms. And, maybe because it was 2 a.m. or maybe it was I was feeding my kiddo only to have her vomit all over my expensive mechanical keyboard. But at that very moment, I shed tears. I almost never want to play BioShock Infinite ever again, as I don't want to ruin such an emotional, special moment. It's something that is so rare in video games. You'll hear a lot about retro games on the show, but modern games are still a large part of my game time. Now, this is also another entry that takes you to another world. Number 1 for me is The Witcher 3. This fantastic RPG immerses you in the role of a monster slayer for hire, spat on by just about everyone you're trying to help in the process. Throw in a few love interests, an addictive card game, hilarious side characters, while others are so vile, yet somehow worth your pity. It's something special. Witcher 3 has great ninja-like combat where you have to utilize not only a sword, or two swords, but also alchemy and magic to make your way through an engrossing story to save literally the world. Not only that, the developer released 2 story DLCs. And look, I get it, folks hate paying for DLC. But if there's ever a case for it, Witcher 3 is it. Giving you a side story where you deal literally with the devil and unravel the origin of a villain who is just a broken and shattered man. It really hits hard in the Heart of Stone. And that other release, Blood and Wine, gives the protagonist Geralt an ending that is so sublime, with every thread knotted, every question answered. I've never been more satisfied with the conclusion to a character arc in any media. CD Projekt Red is one of my favorite developers, and I can't wait to see what they do next.
Hoo boy, my 5 favorite games? Man, I always hate having to answer this question. I've got a collection of thousands of titles, and each one of them is important or enjoyable in some unique fashion. Although this list was probably different last month and will be again next, I'll put 5 standouts on a list for now. And we'll go in reverse chronological order. It'd be even tougher to rank them by actual preference. Number 1, Warframe. This is my desert island game. It may sound odd, but if I could play only one game for the rest of my life, I'd probably choose this one. There's so much variation to the gameplay that it'd keep me busy if I got bored with one particular aspect, and the same goes for resource and item collection. If I get bored grinding for a new blueprint, there's probably a bit of storyline I can do, or resources I can gather for another project. Pair that with a sci-fi world unlike anything I've ever seen, and a quest line that goes in some wild directions. Man, why is this game free? Check it out if you haven't. Number 2, 3D Dot Game Heroes. It's a Zelda-ish game poked up into the third dimension that takes the mickey out of other classic RPGs, starting right from the beginning with Dragon Quest-ish menu music. The game plays terribly satisfying, and the graphics, while voxel blocky, are quite gorgeous in places. There needs to be a remaster or sequel of this game someday. Number 3, Wild Arms 3. This game is as close to perfect as an RPG can get, in my opinion. The graphics have this great sketch look to them that reinforces the Wild West theme, and the same goes for the Western-styled music. It's the battle mechanics that really shine here, though, and the only thing that keeps it from a 100% in my mind is that if you play your cards right, the final boss not only can't hurt you, but will regenerate your health with every attack. Number 4, Brave Fencer Musashi, another Zelda killer, this one taking aim at Ocarina of Time rather than the original title. It's got a lot more personality in my opinion though, with an oddly food and drink themed set of warring kingdoms, and you as Musashi in the middle. Great action and music that seems to endeavor to use every voice on the composer's synthesizer. This one's pricey, but it's definitely worth it. Number 5, Bruce Lee. Of course I had to have at least one Commodore 64 game on here, and though I could probably make a longer list just with titles from that lovely little micro, I'm going with Bruce Lee today. It's a challenging platformer where you need to collect the lanterns in a room to proceed to the next area. You can finish this game in half an hour if you know what you're doing, but there is a sort of New Game Plus that ramps up the difficulty if you continue a second time through. And you can even get a second player to control the normally AI-controlled opponents if you really want to spice things up. There you go. If we do this again next season, I'll probably have a different list, but until then, check these games out and you won't be disappointed.
It's kind of surreal to get to this point, because like I said, I never intended for this to become anything. It was supposed to be a one-off project, maybe 5 episodes, and the sheer interest in being a part of this has been phenomenal. People have sent me messages saying, I want to do this episode, I want to do this episode, look, I want to do voice acting. And that invite is very much out there, and that excites me. If you ever watch these and you want to come out and you want to do voice acting for this, you don't have to be famous. I'm not famous. Half of the people out here, they're not famous. They're just people who have a combined interest in talking about the amazing history of video gaming from start to finish, and that's what this is all about. So let's go ahead and take a look at Season 2 and see what we've got up our sleeves.
Kid, I think you got him. Good shot, kid. I think you got him.
Downtown, speeding all around. The Nike 47 got the power and it's bound to move any mother that gets in my way. Just another power machine on the freeway. Riding with me is my MC homeboy. Knowing the rules ain't part of his program. Finding the right way around this map might be pretty hard cause he's fucked on crack. G, Grand Theft Auto. You gotta make a mark and move where you want to. T, that determination to steal what you can and run from the nation. Hey, what do you say? We automate a secret to speed from our getaway. Take it to the edges.
situation on the ground that is unfolding very quickly.
Move towards more ideas that will actually help bring this thing to an end.
And that's it. Thank you so much for the continued support. If you liked any of those episodes, we might have some open slots, so just go ahead and reach out. I think I'm going to take a break now. It's been a non-stop grind for 2 years, so like the video said, we're going to be back in February of next year for RGGS Main. However, I will be working on the sub-projects before I disappear for January because I've got a training to do in the military. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this finale, and if this is live on Twitch, get ready for some fun, because we're not done playing games, we're not done hanging out with y'all. Love your faces, and as always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes, Fortifier out.